We continue the coverage around the reaction of the suspension of the former ANC President Jacob Zuma from the party. ANC NEC member Thabang Makwetla has penned a strongly worded article slamming his former leader of his association with the newly established Umkhonto WeSizwe party. Makwetla says the MK party is a blasphemy to the legacy of the ANC's military wing. He joins me in studio to talk to us more about that scathing article. Mr. Makwetla, thank you very much for making the time for this conversation. Can I begin this with one of the sentences in your article where you say, and I quote now, "It may be an interesting puzzle to many that Jacob Zuma was never part of the leadership of the ANC military wing," that's Umkhonto WeSizwe. I get a sense there that you're trying to drive home an important matter. Tell us why this is worth mentioning, particularly at a time like this.
Well, thank you very much for having me in the studio today. The point that I was trying to make in that statement is that our former president, former president of the ANC, has come back from retirement, if I can put it that way, to say he is leading Umkhonto WeSizwe party. And as a former leader of the ANC, an impression is created that there is credibility in his decision to be about establishing a party in the name of Umkhonto WeSizwe. As I said in that article, Comrade Jacob Zuma has done very many important things and heroic things in his life in the ANC.
Yeah.
But for him to say he is so concerned about what is happening today that he feels that Umkhonto WeSizwe must be constituted as a party, it's unfortunate. Firstly, because indeed, as part of the leadership of the ANC in that era, he was not part of the HQ, the military headquarters of Umkhonto WeSizwe. He was a member of the Internal Political Construction Committee that was working under the PMC of the ANC.
Why is that important to mention? He was never part of the military headquarters of the MK. Why is that important?
For me, it is important because he has created an impression that he was part of the leadership of Umkhonto WeSizwe, which is not true factually. He was not part of the headquarters of Umkhonto, the military wing of the ANC's headquarters. All of the senior leaders that were in that structure are known. And it's not my view, it is history and it is documented and it is open there.
What exactly was his role within the MK then? Because there is a lot of talk about him being involved in the intelligence wing of whatever was going on within the MK ranks in exile.
That is a very important question that you're raising, because you see, the assumption is that everyone was a member of the military structures of Umkhonto WeSizwe. As Umkhonto WeSizwe, we were trained, but in deployment, in the execution of duties, we were in different areas. Like myself, if I may just give an example, I'm a trained member of Umkhonto WeSizwe, but in the responsibilities that I was executing, I was given the responsibility for the political internal construction of the ANC. Of course, I chaired at some point the RPMC, the Regional Political Military Committee, just as Comrade JZ did in Maputo. But that structure was a political-military structure that came into existence after the Kabwe Conference. And the point is that in the earlier period, the two efforts that the ANC was making to re-establish its presence inside the country, the military and the political work, were kept separate, were under two different leadership teams.
Right.
For a very good reason, because in order to protect political building of the ANC inside the country, military activity that was more inclined to draw security attention to it was the military work was kept outside of the political work. And he is among those who were doing very important work in building the ANC inside the country. He was not part of the military headquarters.
All right. So very important, distinct roles that were there or that existed at the time. We're going to take a break, but when we return, I'd like for you to explain what you have further written here, where you say it is a strange attempt at writing history when he tries, to use your word, to ensconce himself within the community of former MK members. What is that about? We're going to continue in a moment. Let's take a break. Very good morning to you once again. If you're just joining us, well, we continue our conversation with Thabang Makwetla. He says he is a former MK commander, a senior commander at that. He was responsible for the Botswana machinery. And I'm saying this because, Mr. Makwetla, you, in a way, using your article, are basically saying the former president, Jacob Zuma, in his capacity in this instance as someone who was central in the operations of MK in exile, he may possibly be rewriting or attempting to rewrite history here. Let me justify why my question, I'm phrasing it to you that way. You say it is a strange attempt at rewriting history when he tries to establish himself within the community of MK members. Again, why is this important and why this differentiation of the roles? What is it that you are trying to communicate here so that it is clear to the viewer?
What I'm trying to bring to the attention of those who are interested in the story is that the struggle to bring an end to apartheid was a multi-pronged effort. And all of those were involved in different sectors of that the overall struggle were doing very valuable work. I get a sense that the former president is trying to say in that struggle, the component that was most important is the military, by evoking the heroism of those who were in the ranks of Umkhonto WeSizwe.
Right.
To the unintended reducing of the importance of all the other work that was done, complementing the military work. Now, it's strange because he, in his responsibilities, was not responsible for Umkhonto WeSizwe operations. Yes, he was heading a political military structure. As I have said, it is what used to happen in all of the front areas where the ANC had underground leadership, as in, for instance, in Botswana. And just to correct what you were saying earlier on, I was not in charge. I was part of a command, a committee that was in charge of political military work of the ANC from Botswana. So what I'm concerned about, Comrade Jay, is that the way he's positioning himself is to say, I am a member of Umkhonto WeSizwe. I was responsible for the activities of this community. It is the people that I want to be identified with, away from the people that he was actually working with, including MK members who were responsible for political work inside the country, the building of the ANC structures inside the country. And over and above that, my understanding, and this is what I would not be able to vouch for, my understanding is that he at some point also took up responsibility within the intelligence structures. Yes, he was not the head of the intelligence structures, but he was involved. At what level and what his responsibilities were, I would not know. The point which now and again people do not respect is that the ANC was an underground movement. No one individual knew and had a picture of everything that was happening, because we would not have survived if we operated that way.
Which raises
the principle is that you executed on the basis of the need to know in order to deliver what you must deliver.
Which raises an important counter then that may come from him to say exactly what you are saying, that the underground activities were not known to everybody. Nobody can say, I had this overall picture of what was going on within the MK. And he may come back and say, you yourself are trying to write him out of that history, or at least reduce his role. Why is it that what he is doing now paints him as someone who has little understanding of why the MK was established in the first place, and why, as you mentioned in your article, it was important to separate what the MK was doing versus the politics, because you make a very clear point that MK took instructions from the ANC. It never got involved in the politics. And my sense is that you are trying to communicate a point there to say, because he was never part of the military headquarters leadership structures, he therefore did not have this clear understanding of what I've just painted.
A lot of issues are involved there, but let me try and deal with them in their distinct relationships. I am sharing my views informed by what the work and responsibility I was assigned exposed me to.
Right.
And what is that? As part of the political military command in Botswana, like all the military commands in Lesotho, in Swaziland, in Maputo, in London, wherever, we were reporting to the PMC, the Political Military Council, that was responsible for all the internal work of the ANC, all of the internal work, and reporting to the NEC. So I know who the members of the PMC were. And I know the structures that constituted the PMC, that functioned under the PMC. The MHQ of MK, military headquarters of MK, the internal political construction that was responsible for internal building of the ANC and reporting to the PMC, the intelligence structures that were responsible for internal activity reporting to the PMC. So I know the collectives because I was part of that environment. So I know that Jacob Zuma was in the internal political construction committee, which the internal political construction committee in Botswana was reporting to. So I know that command that was sitting in that body that was responsible for political work inside the country, that was reporting to the PMC. And I know that he was part of it. But I also know that he was not part of the military command of Umkhonto WeSizwe, because from the military work that we're doing from Botswana, we're reporting to MHQ, military headquarters in Lusaka, that was reporting to the PMC. And I know that he was not part of that command chain. So what I am saying is not something that I am second-guessing or something that I heard about. It's what I lived, what I've experienced. So I know where he was in that context. There are other details that I can bring to actually substantiate my point that involves my personal involvement with him. But I do not want to make those kind of details an issue. A point has been made to say the ANC's campaign against South Africa was a multifaceted. That armed struggle was multifaceted. It involved, as the ANC would always say, 4 pillars. And those 4 pillars were MK underground work. It was the internal building of the ANC underground structures. It was the mass democratic movement and the international solidarity front. All right. Those are still all of them, if I may just underline this point. That strategy of the 4 pillars of the way the struggle was executed, all of those pillars to this day are still important, barring the military. In what way? In the sense that it is important today that the ANC must be planted within South Africa's communities. It is important that the ANC must move with that whole mass movement, that mass front that brought apartheid down. The ANC must still remain there. We talk about civil society today, which is important in the transformation that we are pursuing. All right. But it is also important that the ANC must make it a point that it doesn't lose its place within the world progressive movement. Because if we lose that, in just the situation that we are dealing with now of leading humanity to be concerned with the crisis in Palestine, that has possible comebacks. And if the ANC is not at all times making it a point that the world is mobilized against counter-progress in human affairs, in international affairs, if we do not make it a point that the progressive movement, the movement for social progress globally is mobilized, we'll actually be exposing ourselves to very, negative forces.
I'd like us to move on then, because in the body of the article, you then bring the politics of the day, if you like, into sharp focus. And I want to quote directly from you. You say, Jacob Zuma's personal impact on the ANC during his presidency cannot go without mention because cardinal mistakes were committed whose harm may still endure into the future. What are some of these, in your view?
Well, we, as humans, are always infallible. I'm sorry, fallible. Comrade JZ had his strong points. It cannot be denied. But like all other comrades, also had his weaknesses. And one of those weaknesses that got profiled by his ascendance to the highest office in the party was the way in which he sought as an individual to garner support within the ANC. Of course, you see, the party today is in constituency politics. It is in the politics of numbers. But it was unfortunate that in gaining numbers behind him, he also was tempted to profile his ethnic identity. And by that I mean that he hails from KZN. It's something that you could see he was very much conscious about. Mm-hmm. To a point that towards the crisis of him being taken up,
fired.
Not fired, when he was facing court cases.
Right.
As a result of the state capture allegations that were made against him. Mm-hmm. He retreated in terms of the political support that he wanted to demonstrate to be having behind him to the region. To a point of having amabuto as people who, he says, he resonated with, and left his party, the ANC, across the 9 provinces to demonstrate his resonance politically in the plight, as far as the plight that he found himself in.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? It means that he was now mobilizing constituencies whose political consciousness and awareness of the mission of the ANC was not up to scratch as far as I am concerned. But what made it worse is that when he came into the presidency, there was those who were supporting his campaign from Polokwane who wanted to say 2 things about Jacob Zuma. One, Jacob Zuma is among ANC leaders someone who is very much conscious of his ethnic identity, I can say tribal identity, mm-hmm. and even as an ANC leader up there, he is not forgetting where he comes from, 1. 2, he is not among those ANC leaders who were fortunate to be academically advanced. They used those 2 issues to say he is therefore a leader who is fit for purpose. Most unfortunate. Most unfortunate for starters because the ANC in its very origin in 1912, when it came into existence, was led by South Africa's first generations of the African intelligentsia. It is those Africans who got exposed to education, even including the religious leaders, but those who got exposed to education who were able to interpret in political terms the plight and the position of South Africa's native populace.
All right.
So to say an ANC leader who is fit for purpose is the one who is less educated, it was just unfortunate. They then went on to come up with a campaign to say he's 100% Zulu boy. ANC president who was presented as 100%, they don't even say 15% Zulu boy and there's other identity. His other identity is of being a South African that speaks to all of the characteristics the ANC sought to promote in order to build a nation. They put all of that aside, they say he's 100% Zulu boy. And he allows that ethnic chauvinism to snowball, that campaign to snowball within the ANC. Under his watch, he says nothing that people say about him that he's 100% Zulu in his makeup.
But Mr. Makwetla, this is exactly why the people of South Africa then slate the ANC. They blame you for all of these because, as you describe them, these were cardinal mistakes. But at the moment, what you are painting are the ANC's own internal struggles, politics of identity within the party, that some must rise using their tribal or politics of identity, as you say, and leaving out the important element of the people of South Africa. That's why I want to move on to this, because you invoke this in the article, and I quote again, "The decision by former President Mbeki to relieve his deputy, Jacob Zuma, of his responsibility in government in 2005 was an important signpost in this journey." Why was that important to mention?
It was important, in my view, to mention that because we should not make the mistake of looking at what is happening around Comrade Jacob Zuma as a story of an individual. It was never like that. And even into the future, the story of leaders is not the story of individuals, because it's not individuals who make history. It is the interest of broader communities, broader groups of humans that make events to move in a particular direction. Comrade JZ's story in the ANC cannot be divorced from the support for the direction in which he was pulling things that he got within the ANC from ANC members themselves. Mm-hmm. It is important for us to appreciate that on his own as an individual, he wouldn't have made things to turn out the history of the last period when he was at the center of the organization to be what it is. There was a momentum within the party itself of views, of numbers that were supportive of what he was doing. The question is why? What were these members of the ANC believing was correct to do that Jacob Zuma was championing? And that is what the party has to address.
So are you saying that when you say this was an important signpost in this journey, when Mbeki fired him as his deputy, what are you saying there? Decode that and put that in simple language, because there are those political observers who have written, for example, someone I interviewed this morning, he writes very clearly about it to say these were signs that Jacob Zuma should not have been the president of the ANC. If anything, when he discovered that there were those who were trying to prevent his ascendancy by using all of the troubles that encircled him, he then played the victim card. What are you saying, Mr. Makwetla? Are you saying that it was a mistake for the ANC to have put up former President Jacob Zuma as a presidential candidate?
The point, I think, which we must appreciate in relation to the statement you are making reference to is that much earlier than 2005, where the president of the country, Thabo Mbeki, decides to relieve his deputy of his responsibility, a lot of things that the ANC itself was unhappy about had happened and were happening in relation to corrupt practices long before 2005. And matter of fact, as you know, some of these challenges were profiled by Comrade Nelson Mandela at the Mafikeng conference when he handed over the presidency to Thabo Mbeki, to say there is a very real need for the ANC to look at itself in relation to the practices that are emerging within its own ranks. And he said, there is a culture of careerism. There is a culture of individuals who, in their responsibilities, they are actually helping themselves more than assisting the organization to deliver on its historic mission. He raises that point earlier then. So, this issue about corruption was spoken about, but exactly what was happening, who was doing what, it's something that was difficult to fathom. But you could tell that there was unhappiness that there are people among us who are doing wrong things. When the president took a decision to relieve the deputy president on account of the case that was in the court, the arms deal, it was clear that the president was drawing the line in the sand to say, as far as keeping a clean system in this country, as the ANC, there are no holy cows. I am going to assist the organization to get the deputy president to put the ANC on a moral high ground by clearing himself. But what did that lead to? A backlash within the ANC, because that's what led to President Mbeki's,
Can I put this straightforward question to you?
Yes.
Was former President Jacob Zuma a suitable candidate for the position of president to begin with?
Well, I have only, I've always had a very clear understanding of what I believe were the mistakes we committed in the leadership succession of the ANC. But as a disciplined member, it is not for me to put it in this platform, that perspective, where we went wrong, and what is my view of what should have happened.
Some are going to say the difficulty in you answering that question clearly is in part because you are among those that are counted as having been implicated in matters of state capture. As a matter of fact, there is a matter relating to Bosasa. And so you can't come and speak as though you are not tainted yourself. That's where this thing circles back to. And people say, that is why, if the ANC were genuine on this issue of putting up clean candidates to positions of responsibility, the ANC would not have a single soul to put up front.
That's another big talking point that I would want us to engage on. You know, the Zondo, the State Capture Commission, with all respect, it's one experience in my life that has made me have a second view about people who are educated. Because I grew up with a lot of respect for what education does to people. The Zondo Commission's work, I would imagine in relation to the other cases that they handled, was professional. But give yourself time and just go and read what the State Capture Commission says about Thabang Makwetla.
All right. We're not going to belabor that point. Let's conclude this conversation here, because you do conclude your piece by asking a very important question, and that is, what does Zuma's departure mean to the ANC right now? I'd like you to answer that question. Very briefly.
The lived experience in relation to the ANC's effort to try and get everything back on the rails as far as its traditions, as far as its record, has always been whether it was possible for renewal of the ANC to happen when within the very same leadership you have comrades who have ended up in jail, the way the former president of the ANC did, but the way he went to prison because he refused to share what he knew about what happened around state capture. I mean, it's a very damning consideration why he ended up in jail. If you are going to renew the ANC, is it possible that you could do that, execute that mission with people who are so compromised? Because obviously, even before you start, you know that you are not together on the matter of renewal. You know that you are not together. So my point is that Jacob Zuma's decision to define himself outside of the ANC has actually released, it has freed the ANC from the constraint it had to renew itself that Jacob Zuma imposed on it, because he was part of the very senior leadership at the top there. He was an ex-officio member of the NEC because he's a former president.
So it's good riddance.
He sits in those meetings.
Are you saying it's good riddance?
It is a huge advantage the ANC has gained by Jacob Zuma says, I am not part of you. You can continue doing what you are doing. It's a huge development which this leadership has actually not worked for. They didn't push him out. Because the other question to that would be, why was this leadership finding it proper to have him still as part of it after they had actually supported a process that sent him to jail? Why?
Well,
so what I'm saying,
let me say this.
Yeah.
The problem is time, Mr. Makwetla, because there's so much to unpack exactly on what you've just said. Because as much as you're saying that this leadership now does not have that responsibility to get rid of this baggage, because you use that word, by the way, when you talk in his, you're saying he is the baggage that ought to be let out of the party. But it is the same governing party, it is the same people in government that have made the decision that when he was sent to jail, a remission was then instituted where he is let out along with other people whom the opposition is saying those people that he was let out with are now reoffending and they are abusing the same communities that they abused before they were sent to jail. Do you see the consequences of what the ANC and its deployees in government have done and continue to do to the people of South Africa?
And it is a pity that Comrade JZ has no appreciation of that, the extent to which the party had to bend backwards to cover for their own, one of their own.
That's a very important admission.
Yeah,
that's what you are admitting to, that the ANC, through its deployees in government, bent over backwards to let him out of jail.
The letting him out of jail, it's a specific matter. I do not want to speak to that. I'm talking about the overall deportment of the ANC to the infractions that Comrade JZ was guilty of. The organization, in my view, tolerated those infractions at its own expense, at the expense of its own credibility. JZ says, Comrade JZ says, the ANC that he knows, he can't even recognize it in what is there today. But that is an irony. It's an irony because the ANC is actually facing the challenge of not being associated with what it was because of what it has done as a result of bending backwards to accommodate Jacob Zuma.
Thabang Makwetla, we could talk all day. Let me thank you very much for your time, for your openness. At times I wish you could have spoken directly, but I suppose some people are going to say, but there are constraints, perhaps, on your part. But some very important admissions here today from yourself. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Xoli, for having me in your studio one more time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.